Um, so the topic is social cognition. And by social cognition, I mean the ways that children think about and understand, and in some ways even feel about or interpret their relationship with peers, the way that they understand the behaviors of others in social interactions and their own behaviors in social interactions. And there's different models of social cognition. And the one I'm going to talk to you about today is certainly the most explicated of those models. It's Ken Dodge's model of social information processing, and you'll remember that social information or information processing models in general, they usually show us like flow charts, uh, stepwise kinds of ways that we process information. You remember they use the computer as sort of a metaphor to think about how humans think. Well, this is a model of social information processing and how we take in and use information in social settings. And Dodge in this model doesn't think that we actually stop and follow through every one of these steps, that they happen really quickly and simultaneously. But what he's doing is he's breaking down steps to describe them and think about places where uh, the processing of information could be hindered or could break down to help us identify maybe difficulties that children might have in processing their social behavior and the behavior of others. So this is a stepwise sort of model. So within a given social interaction, a child first must attend to and encode social cues, then they interpret what those cues mean, generate a response to that cue, select the most appropriate, and act those responses out. And this is a recursive kind of model. So this child is in interaction with another child, so their social information processing and behavior then becomes the cue for their partner, who then processes that information. So let's look at each of these steps. The first step is encoding. Does the child attend to the cue in the first place? And if you'll remember general information processing models, if we didn't attend to something in the first place, we never remembered it. We never encoded it. This is the same sort of thing. Are we paying attention to the social cue? Are we picking up relevant information? And there's individual differences here in how adept children are at recognizing the social cues that others give them, like if the other person was smiling, did they pick that up? The way this has been typically assessed is by telling children stories or showing them hypothetical stories on video or acting them out with puppets and props, and then asking them to describe what happened. So you can see there's a bit of a overlap here in the way this is measured and with children's verbal ability in general. But there are some studies that show that just that attention to cues is such an important first step. And also that children, for example, aggressive children may overly attend to or overly notice aggressive sorts of cues, which brings us to the attributions of intent. This is that second interpretation stage. Once we encode a cue, we have to sort of decide what that cue means. So imagine that you were a second grader and you were drinking water from the water fountain, and somebody comes up behind and bumps you, and the water squirts up your nose. We don't know anything about the person's facial expressions or what they were looking at because we were looking at the water fountain. Do we think they did that because it was an accident? They just bumped into us? Or do we think they did that because they were being mean and trying to start a fight with us? That kind of interpretation in that benign situation, or not a benign, but an ambiguous kind of situation, do we interpret in a more benign, accidental way, or do we interpret it in a more aggressive kind of way? And another example, let's say that you were a child out on the playground. Maybe you're a first grader and you're about to go in the door to go inside, and a playground ball hits you on the back of the head. Do you assume that someone was being mean and trying to hurt you with that ball, or maybe it was an accident? It's a playground, there's balls thrown around. Or maybe your friend was throwing you the ball and didn't know you were going to turn around and and it just happened to hit you in the back of the head. So we can make this more uh, easygoing sort of interpretation, or this more aggressive kind of interpretation. And once we generate the cue, this is just a kind of a depiction here. She encodes the cue and interprets what it means, and then she has to generate a response. And the cue was that Kelvin was hiding a water balloon, and her response was to run away. So once we interpret what the cue means, we generate a strategy. We generate a strategy that we'll follow. So here's this amazing graphic of attributions. So this person who was hit with the ball could think, somebody's trying to throw the ball to me. Or they could think, oh, that was an accident. Or they could think that someone was trying to hurt them. Now, younger children, especially 4-year-olds and kindergartners, over-attribute hostility in benign situations. It's almost as if something bad happens, they assume that someone was being mean to them. And that kind of makes sense if you remember that they're egocentric and they have a hard time taking other people's point of view. And so if something harms them, they assume it was something bad. Now, there are some individual differences there, and not all children at that young age act upon those hostile attributions. In fact, how well they regulate their behavior and emotions uh, governs whether they react to those hostile attributions during early childhood. But from second grade to eighth grade, one of the most replicated findings that we have in the study of peer relations is that there's what's called a hostile attribution bias among children between second and eighth grade who are identified as more aggressive. So children with higher rates of aggressive behavior identified by their teachers or through observations or through a variety of means, they have a propensity to make more hostile attributions in ambiguous situations. So if it's not clear if the person's intention was accidental or if their intention was aggressive, children who are more aggressive are more likely to make that attribution that the other person's behavior was more aggressive. And so we'll see that again when we talk about social behavior and aggression. But this is a finding that's been found by a large number of studies and a large number of participants. The next step, once once a child makes an attribution about the meaning of the behavior, is they generate a response. This has sometimes been called social problem solving. You think of it as a script that a child used, their social strategies. So the way that this has been measured is to present children with a hypothetical dilemma and say, hey, imagine that uh, this child comes and knocks your block down. What would you do next? Maybe through videos, maybe acted out with puppets or props. And then those strategies that children generate are rated for, is the content of them pro-social? Is it more aggressive? Is it more withdrawn? Um, in general, children's strategies that are more assertive, that are more engaging and more pro-social are associated with children who are more accepted by their peers. Strategies that are more vague or more withdrawn are associated with children who uh, are more isolated from their peers, and children whose strategies are more aggressive display more aggressive types of behavior. Now, Dodge adds another step before enactment, and that is the evaluation of the response. And this involves some self-efficacy. If I tried this, would it work for me? And studies have shown that children over uh, third grade or so, if you ask them to select which strategy would work best, those that select more pro-social strategies do demonstrate more higher levels of peer acceptance. Those who endorse the more aggressive strategies do show more aggressive behavior. I believe that for younger children, um, they're more likely to respond with a sort of top of the bin response. Really, the first strategy that comes to the mind is the one that they're more likely to act upon without really evaluating that. And the next step in Dodge's model is the behavior enactment of that strategy, and then that behavior enactment becomes the cue for their social partner who then processes that information. And so it's a reciprocal interacting over time.